So we're nearing the end of our third unit here, and this unit has been all about social and political philosophy. What is that? Well, it basically has to do with how are we supposed to organize ourselves? What is all this crap? How does it work? Is it good for us? Etc. Today we're looking at a thinker who takes a rather big picture view of all of this stuff. An incredible woman, one of my favorite philosophers, actually the philosopher that I wrote my thesis on in graduate school, on one sentence in the book that we're going to be looking at today. And I think what she has to say is really important and insightful. And hopefully you come away with the same beliefs today. But we'll see. I'll start by giving you just a little bit of background on who this philosopher is as a person, a little bit historical context, and then we're going to talk about the chapter that I asked you all to read today, and we'll wrap up with some of the big themes and key takeaways of this magnificent book. So Hannah Arendt was one of the most influential political philosophers of the 20th century. A student of another famous thinker who you may have heard of, Heidegger, and actually his partner and love interest for a while. She's somebody who has a very unique style. It's difficult to track a lot of times what her argument is and what she's saying, because like me, she writes in this overly technical jargon. But if you can mine it, if you can understand it, she's saying some really cool stuff here. And what this book is basically about is exactly what the title says. The human condition. What is human life like? What do we do? How do we relate to the stuff outside of us? And what does our nature or our characteristics imply about how it is that we should be living and how it is that we should be organizing society? Now, Arendt was obviously alive a while ago. As I told you, she wrote within the 20th century. She was a German-American historian and philosopher, although she wouldn't have considered herself a philosopher. She was modest like that. And she's somebody who was Jewish and was forced to flee Germany when the Nazis rose to power, after she was arrested and jailed for doing research into Jewish history and anti-Semitic policy that was coming up during that day. Consequently, her experiences as a Jew during this important time in human history has had a really big impact on her philosophy and the questions and issues that she sought to analyze and answer. She's written on topics like totalitarianism, evil, democracy in human societies, and political theory more generally. And though she lived during a very chaotic and turbulent time, I think I can say after reading a few of her works that did not destroy her spirit or her belief in the goodness or at least the potential of humanity. One of the things, for example, that we're going to see at the end of this book, if you ever read it, is her insistence on the practices of promise-making and forgiveness as a means to progress human life and social relationships. Now, what is she doing in this book? Well, generally, what she says she's doing is she's trying to describe what we are doing in human society and in human life, with how we have organized ourselves, the institutions that we have built up, and the norms and values that we follow and condition others into following. What I like about Arendt's work is, like Leo Strauss, she's not somebody who's going to look at these topics and issues just through a modern lens, but she's somebody who was very well read and interested in ancient philosophy. And one of the threads that we see in this book is this idea that ancient Greek philosophy and ancient political theory has something important to say about analyzing the current predicament we are in. It provides us with a lot of tools and perspectives with which to analyze, critique, and reform contemporary society. I think we would all agree that things are not perfect. Things are not as we would want them to be. Why? What exactly is that like? And how do we get out of this mess? Well, that's kind of what she's trying to describe in this book. Her analysis begins with looking at the fundamental nature of what we might generally call the human condition. What is it like to experience this kind of world that we live in? Based on our characteristics, our history, our genes, and all of that stuff, our institutions, how is it that we act? How is it that we live? These are some of the things that she discusses at the beginning of the book. And so I'd like to begin by just going over that. The chapter that I asked y'all to read for today discusses Arendt's taxonomy of the three basic activities of human life. And though her philosophy is abstract, the reason why it's important to go through this stuff, and it's related to what we're looking at in this unit, is because Arendt is going to argue that the nature of these fundamental activities should say something about how we should organize ourselves and how we should be living. And so she says, basically, all human activity can be separated into three forms: labor, work, and action. We'll start with labor. Human beings are mortal creatures. We live and we grow and we die. We are biological creatures. We have all of these capacities and mechanisms, organs and processes that are going on in the human body that we depend on for survival. All of the stuff that is associated with that, that's what she calls labor. And this is one fundamental activity that humans engage in. All of those activities associated with sustaining the biological life process. Now, what are some of those activities that we need to engage in to sustain ourselves, to maintain our survival? Well, what do you all think? What do you need to do in order to survive? Eat, right, yes, eating. We engage in eating. What else? Drinking, right? Yeah, what else? Yeah. Sleeping. Yeah, we can't stay up all the time, right? We need to sleep. Yes. We need this to survive. Anything else? Yeah.
I don't know if this would count, but like bodily functions count, like breathing and stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely, they do. You might not think of these as activities, but this is what our body is doing, right? Breathing, digesting, shitting. These are all things that we need to do to survive, right? Yeah, so bodily functions. We'll write that down. Whether we consciously or intentionally do this or not, this is one of the fundamental activities that we engage in as bodied beings, as biological creatures. We need to breathe, sleep, eat, drink, piss, all of that stuff. And if we don't, serious problems arise, right? All of these things are necessary to keep ourselves alive. Okay, so that's one kind of activity that we engage in. let's think about another fundamental human activity. What are intelligent creatures capable of doing? Thinking, reflecting. Yeah, think even more basic than that. What do we do, perhaps, that insects don't do? Talk. That's true. We have the capacity for speech. That's going to be a big thing that she actually talks about in this chapter, that influences strongly our social and political life. What is this? A marker? What is the thing sitting in front of you? A table. What's the other thing? A notebook, a laptop, a chair, a hatchet. What are all of these things?
Inanimate?
Yeah.
Would it be like comprehending objects and tools?
Tool use. Yeah, exactly. For Arendt, she's going to call work basically the making of stuff. We engage in the making of stuff, the production of artifacts, you might say, like tools. So all of those activities that produce artificial things is what she's going to call work. One of the things that sets us apart from the other animals is that we make stuff. We make tools. We build homes. We produce objects that influence us, that we use. And what's going to be important for Arendt is the kind of function that this activity has. We saw in the first one already, right? Labor has a specific function. There's a reason that our body engages in it, to keep us alive. Well, why do we build homes and computers, axes and nets and pens and pencils?
To make a living?
Kinda. Yeah, that's what we do now. The answer is staring you right in the face. It's just to make human life easier, right? With tables and chairs and laptops, human life is made easier. And what she's going to say also is that this activity provides some stability to human life. It is through this activity that we construct a kind of environment that provides us with stability and security. So we might list under this activity things like crafting, carpentry, erecting homes, right? Architecture. This is another fundamental activity that we engage in. For some reason or another, we're not just, hanging out in the forest with no tools or objects. No, we create objects. We make things in the world. And this fundamental aspect of the human condition is something that Marx gets into as well in his writings. He says that kind of what makes a human being, a member of their species being, is that they produce things, they create things, and they seek to see themselves reflected in the works of their creation. The reason why we are alienated nowadays, he thought, is because we're not doing that. We don't get to decide what we create or produce. We don't have control over that process. We don't get to keep the products of our labor, so on and so forth. But we'll talk about that next week. Okay. So we engage in labor and we engage in work. the last activity that she mentions that is fundamental to human life is what she calls action. And this one is a little bit more abstract, but it has to do with the founding and preserving of political bodies and the making of history. You might say giving great speeches is an example of this, or saving someone from a burning building might be an example of this. This is an activity, she thinks, that is distinct from these other ones. And so by action, she means all those activities that go on between humans or among humans which serve to found and preserve our political communities. And she doesn't just mean politics by this. That is one form that this action might take, right? Canvassing, going door to door and talking to people, raising money, that kind of stuff. Action is bigger than that. It's more abstract than that. But it is something that we do every day. This is something that we are all engaging in right now. Here, I'll write it down here so y'all can read it. These are the fundamental activities that humans engage in. And the reason why we're discussing this is because it has something important to do with why everything is the way that it is in society. Why do we have hospitals? Why do we have people who farm our food for us and distribute it and all that stuff? Well, because we care about living, right? That's important, surviving. Why do we care about tables and chairs, new inventions, new technologies? Why do we engage in that? Well, because it makes our lives easier, because it provides a stable environment for us that allows us to connect with one another. It allows us to form relationships. Why do we engage in action? Well, that's just a natural part of what it means to be human. We do things. And we do things amongst one another. All of these fundamental activities and how we engage in them end up influencing the kind of society and mode of economic organization that we construct. So, even though this is a little bit abstract, it is directly related to the present state of society and the problems that we are faced with right now. To help bolster her argument, Arendt in this chapter then goes on to describe how ancient Greek political thought conceived of human life, the different kinds of life paths available to the human being, and what those kinds of lives entailed. So we're going to switch to that now, and by the end of this lecture, we're going to be able to describe what kind of state we are in right now and how it has gotten to be like this. Because these questions are going to be extremely important, and we must consider them if we're going to try to change society for the better. If we think that there are problems, there are people suffering, and we want to ameliorate that. So the next thing that she does is she provides something of an analysis of ancient Greek and Roman life and history. Because what she's going to end up arguing is the way that these ancient societies and peoples conceived of human life, politics, and society is very different from how we're doing that now. And it's causing a lot of problems. By confusing these activities, by having differing conceptions of what makes a human being, and how it is that we're supposed to live, it's leading us into all these issues that we are now having to deal with today, despite the fact that we don't have the power or the wisdom to really fix them in our present condition. We've already discussed in this class different political ideologies, the real nature of political power and what that looks like, what we want our leaders to be like, how we want them to act. Today, fundamentally, what we're looking at is one perspective on how our ideas about these things are wrong, and therefore the way that we've set up society and the kinds of lives that we are encouraging people to live is actually causing us a whole bunch of problems. And so part of what we're trying to do today is diagnose where our ideas, conceptions, and values are wrong so that we can all steer ourselves in a better direction. Or at least that's going to be Arendt's hot take. And I think she is getting something right here. Unsurprisingly, ancient Greek, Roman life and history is very different from how we are living now and conceiving of these things. She notes that in his philosophy, Aristotle argues that there are three basic life paths that humans can take. The kinds of lives that are available to us once we have freed ourselves from the necessity of labor. And before I describe what these life paths are, let me just talk a little bit about this point. One of the big things that she discusses in this first chapter is how very different the ancient Greeks organized society and life compared to us. In present day society, we all have to get jobs. We all have to engage in labor. We have to do a bunch of these things that are necessary for our own survival. That is how we've set things up, right? In order to survive in our society, you have to get a job and make money so you can buy the stuff that you need to survive. Well, in ancient Greek society, it wasn't like this for everyone. Sure, a lot of people had to do this, but if you were fortunate enough to do that well, you could free yourself from having to engage in labor. Why? Well, one of the reasons why is because a lot of these ancient Greek guys who were engaging in politics had slaves that could do the work for them. And they had a certain kind of home life that allowed them to spend more time and energy thinking about things and engaging in politics rather than having to work themselves. Now, Arendt is not saying that that's good, but what she's saying is that the way that they had organized society had allowed some of them to live a different kind of life than we are living now. And they conceived of politics and society differently than we do today. For them, what it meant to engage in some sort of authentic political action and mode of organization was tied up with being freed from having to worry and do all of this yourself. If you are enslaved to working or enslaved to looking after the growing of your own food and all of this stuff, well, that prevented you from living a certain kind of lifestyle. For those who were freed from this activity, there are 3 life paths that were available to them. The first one is what Aristotle and Arendt call the life of beauty, pleasure, and consumption. This is something that we still see today, right? How might you live if you've become a billionaire? If you don't have to worry about working anymore? Well, you might live a kind of hedonistic lifestyle, right? You might seek out and do drugs, sex and orgies, alcohol, going to art museums and looking at art, the fulfillment of your own desires. Once you have leisure time, this is one life that you might live. And this is a life that we see a lot of people living today, right? Once they have made it. What do? They go to parties, they drink, they do drugs, they spend money on ridiculous things they don't need because it, fulfills some sort of desire for them. They try to satiate their desires. So that's one path that you might take. Once you have mastered, in some sense, all those activities necessary to keep yourself alive. And you kind of live like this already, right? Yeah, you have to go to school and get a degree so you can get a job, but what do you do in your free time? Well, you drink and you smoke and you watch Netflix and you hit your vape and it's all good, right? This is not the only life path that is available to us, though. Rather than focusing our gaze inward on the satisfying of our own desires and feeling good, we might engage in a more communal lifestyle, a more political lifestyle. And this is the second path that she discusses. The authentic political life, the life of action, the life of the person who is going out there and doing things amongst their community, making great speeches, serving others, helping out others, forming and contributing to politics. And this is one kind of life that a lot of the ancient Greek men who could participate in politics did engage in. In fact, it was an expectation that once you had got your home in order and you had organized everything that you needed to at home such that you didn't have to worry about growing your own food and working and all this stuff, it was expected that you would learn how all the politics in your city-state worked and that you would participate in that. You would spend time thinking about that and engaging in that. Talking amongst your fellow politicians, voting on things, determining policy. This was an expectation back in the day, an obligation, you could say, of free men. But of course, as we know, if we look at history, there is still yet at least one life path available to you once you have mastered the activities of labor. And that would be the life, perhaps, of the philosopher, the thinker, the intellectual, maybe the artist. This is the life of contemplation and knowledge. We might say that this first kind of life, the life of beauty, pleasure, and consumption, is one in which our gaze is focused inward on the satisfying of our own desires. The life of political action is one in which our gaze is focused outward on the health of our community, on politics, on policy, on economics, to the world of human beings that they are participating in. And we might say that this third life, the life of contemplation and knowledge, is not focused inward towards the self or outward towards the other, but upward towards the transcendental universal truths and principles of the cosmos. And so these are all very different kinds of lifestyles, right? Somebody who is seeking after the communion of understanding and experiencing the universal truths of human life is a very different kind of life than somebody whose gaze is focused on, okay, the here and now, the material world. And it's very different from somebody who's focused on just satisfying their own desires and not caring too much about others. According to Arendt, one of these kinds of lives ended up taking precedence over the others through the development of Western society and tradition. Nowadays, we might say that this is the life that takes the cake, right? This is the life that everybody engaged in. But historically, what she argues, is what ended up happening is this life, the life of contemplation, ended up taking precedence over the life of political action. And that is why we end up having a lot of problems and wrong ideas today. One of the main arguments that she's going to try to support for us in this chapter is that the reason why we have so many issues and problems today is because too many people have their heads in the clouds and they're not focused on improving things in the here and now. And she tries to trace this historically through the emergence, rise, and saturation of Christianity in the West, and the deterioration of these different social and political institutions throughout Western history. This life of contemplation, of knowledge, of thinking, is what she calls, in contrast to the vita activa, the active life, the vita contemplativa, the life of contemplation. And so this life of contemplation over time ended up take precedence over the active life in people's minds and imaginations and just in human society generally. And something else happened due to this shift. Not only did this contemplative life come to take precedence over the political life that is focused on this world and maintaining the stuff of this world and building what she calls a stable human artifice, which might bind us together and properly orient us towards the things that need our immediate attention. But this life came to signify activity in general, she says. In other words, it led people to have a mistaken view of the kinds of lives that they ought to be living and the kinds of priorities that they should be embodying in their personal and their public lives. See, one of the things that Christianity ended up doing, according to Arendt, is it drew people away from being concerned about the stuff of this world. What is the fundamental picture, for example, that Christianity offers us? Well, there's the material realm and then there's the spiritual realm. There is what's happening in the here and now. This world is fallen. It's sinful. And then there is the perfect spiritual realm. If you follow the will of God and you believe in Him, namely Jesus, then you'll go to the good place when you die, right? Heaven. If you don't, you'll go to the bad place. And here you will stay for all eternity, either in eternal bliss or in eternal suffering. That is the general picture that people came to have of Christianity, of what it represented and what it said. Arendt is not saying that that in itself is bad or necessarily wrong, but what she's saying is what this caused people to do is to orient themselves towards the spiritual and not enough towards the stuff of this world. Consequently, when people are just thinking about the hereafter and that's what they orient their lives around, do you think they're going to put much time and energy into fixing the stuff of this world? Caring about it? Being concerned about it? No. Right? And if you just think of how people have acted throughout the ages and the kind of present society that we have now, that might also testify to the fact that people are not caring enough about these material, earthly things. They're thinking too much about ideals, about what comes next, about what is intellectual or spiritual. The way that she continues her analysis is she discusses how these two lives are oriented fundamentally to two different things. The active life and the contemplative life. Both, she says, are associated with two human concerns, but each is oriented towards a different human concern. The active life, the vita activa, she says, was concerned with immortality. And the contemplative life, she says, was concerned or oriented towards what she calls eternity. And I'll unpack what this means here in a second. She says on pages 18 and 19 the following. Oops. Embedded in a cosmos where everything was immortal, this was the ancient Greek conception, the gods were immortal, it would seem because in some sense other creatures are just going to keep on reproducing, that species is going to live forever. You know, as long as we don't intervene in it, they're going to keep on having babies. Embedded in a cosmos where everything was immortal, mortality became the hallmark of human existence. Men are the mortals, the only mortal things in existence in some sense. Because unlike animals, they do not exist only as a member of a species whose immortal life is guaranteed through procreation. The mortality of men lies in the fact that the individual life, with a recognizable life story from birth to death, rises out of biological life. This individual life is distinguished from all other things by the rectilinear course of its movement, which, so to speak, cuts through the circular movement of biological life. This is mortality. To move along a rectilinear line in a universe where everything, if it moves at all, moves in a cyclical order. So just as all of the planetary bodies complete their cycles and they just keep on doing this and they're going to do this forever, it would seem that from the human point of view, all other things in existence are like that as well. They keep on reproducing, they keep on reproducing. But we don't have to do that. And we are aware of our condition. We could kill ourselves if we wanted to. And the continued existence of our species is not determined. So, by all accounts, we seem to be the mortal things when we look at everything else in the world, based on the ancient Greek perspective. The task and potential greatness of mortals lie in their ability to produce things, works and deeds and words, which would deserve to be, and at least to a degree, are at home in everlastingness, so that through them mortals could find their place in a cosmos where everything is immortal except themselves. By their capacity for the immortal deed, by their ability to leave non-perishable traces behind, men, their individual mortality notwithstanding, attain an immortality of their own and prove themselves to be of a divine nature. The distinction between man and animal runs right through the human species itself. Only the best, aristoi, this is where we get aristocrat from, who constantly prove themselves to be the best and who prefer immortal fame to mortal things, are really human. The others, content with whatever pleasures nature will yield them, live and die like animals. This was still the opinion of Heraclitus, an opinion whose equivalent one will find in hardly any philosopher after Socrates. And so what she's trying to say here is that through reason, through reflection, through the nature of our own existence on this planet, we alone are aware of our own mortality. And it seems that every other thing is just going to go on existing in some sense. Our ability to create and do things, however, allows us to leave behind some sort of immortal legacy. By writing the best book in the world, by producing the most epic song in the world, by doing something extremely heroic and life-saving, you can go on living forever in a sense, even after you die, because people will remember you. And this is what ancient Greek political life revolved around. Everybody was trying to achieve this kind of immortality, to leave behind a lasting legacy so that they would be remembered, so that they would not be forgotten in the annals of history. But this is not how humans, by and large, are thinking and acting now. By and large, we've given up on the hope that we can do that. Does any of you in this room think that you'll be able to be remembered 1,000 years after your death? You're like, no, I don't even think that's possible. So something fundamental about how we conceive of our own existence and what it is that we ought to be doing has changed. And what she's going to say now is that humans in our present age have an inauthentic concern for immortality. And that is one of the reasons why all this stuff is fucked up. Is because we're not trying to build something lasting that is going to allow us to be remembered, we're not really concerned with that at all. Okay, so this first kind of life, she says, is associated with this concern for immortality, or leaving behind a legacy. It used to be that humans vied to achieve a place in the universe and an immortality all their own through thought, deed, creation, etc. The ancient conception was a life focused around activity that would produce a legacy. Not so anymore. Sure, there are some people who are thinking and living like this, but by and large, this is not how we think and act nowadays. Nowadays, how we think and act doesn't revolve around living behind a lasting legacy. It's not one associated so much with activity as it is associated with a certain kind of experience. This is a very different North Star. She talks about this on the next two pages, pages 20 and 21, the end of this chapter, if you were able to get that far. In our context, it is of no great importance whether Socrates himself or Plato discovered the eternal as the true center of strictly metaphysical thought. It weighs heavily in favor of Socrates that he alone among the great thinkers never cared to write down his thoughts. For it is obvious that no matter how concerned a thinker may be with eternity, the moment he sits down to write his thoughts, he ceases to be concerned primarily with eternity and ceases his attention to leaving some trace of them. He has entered, in this instance, the vita activa, and chosen its way of permanence and potential immortality. One thing is certain. It is only in Plato that concern with the eternal and the life of the philosopher are seen as inherently contradictory and in conflict with the striving for immortality, the way of the life of the citizen, the bios politikos. The philosopher's experience of the eternal, which to Plato was unspeakable and to Aristotle without word, and which later was conceptualized in the paradoxical nunc stans, the standing now, or the eternal present, if you've ever heard of that, can only occur outside the realm of human affairs and outside the plurality of human beings, as we know from the cave parable in Plato's Republic, where the philosopher, having liberated himself from the fetters that bound him to his fellow men, leaves the cave in perfect singularity, as it were, neither accompanied nor followed by others. Politically speaking, if to die is the same as to cease to be among men, experience of the eternal is a kind of death, and the only thing that separates it from real death is that it is not final, because no living creature can endure it for any length of time. And this is precisely what separates the contemplative life from the active life in medieval thought. Yet it is decisive that the experience of the eternal, in contradistinction to that of the immortal, has no correspondence with and cannot be transformed into any activity whatsoever. Since even the activity of thought, which goes on within oneself by means of words, is obviously not only inadequate to render it, but would interrupt and ruin the experience itself. Theoria, or contemplation, is the word given to the experience of the eternal, as distinguished from all other attitudes, which at most may pertain to immortality. It may be that the philosophers' discovery of the eternal was helped by their very justified doubt of the chances of the city-state for immortality or even permanence. And it may be that the shock of this discovery was so overwhelming that they could not but look down upon all striving for immortality as vanity and vainglory, certainly placing themselves thereby into open opposition to the ancient city-state and the religion which inspired it. However, the eventual victory of the concern with eternity over all kinds of aspirations toward immortality is not due to philosophic thought. The fall of the Roman Empire plainly demonstrated that no work of mortal hands can be immortal. And it was accompanied by the rise of the Christian gospel, of an everlasting individual life to its position as the exclusive religion of Western mankind. Both together made any striving for an earthly immortality futile and unnecessary. And they succeeded so well in making the active life, which was concerned with leaving behind a legacy, and politics, the handmaidens of contemplation, that not even the rise of the secular in the modern age and the concomitant reversal of the traditional hierarchy between action and contemplation sufficed to save from oblivion the striving for immortality, which originally had been the spring and center of the active life. And so what are we concerned with nowadays? Well, unlike the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans, to which we owe a lot of our traditions and ideas and schools of thought and all of this stuff, unlike them, who are actually concerned with living an authentic political life that would provide a stable human environment that would be lasting and permanent so that they could be remembered forever, we don't care about that. What we care about is having certain kinds of experiences, not leaving behind things that are going to be permanent and lasting. Think about it. What are people in your generation trying to do? Are they trying to write the next great book, produce the greatest new invention that is going to change history forever? Or are they chasing after experiences? Experiences with drugs, at concerts, buying that nice pillow, playing that nice video game. These are two very different kinds of life. This is not something that your generation has only fallen into. This is something that has been happening and progressing for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And Arendt is going to say this is a big problem. Since our priorities have changed, since what we orient our lives and social and political institutions around have changed, that has caused us to do a bunch of stupid stuff, and that has caused our institutions and our traditions to fall into disarray and corruption and harm people and produce suffering. So in some sense, what she's calling us to do is reorient ourselves to actually making this world better and more stable for people, rather than just chasing after our own narcissistic desires or cultivating some experiences which make us feel good. Thus, what she's doing in this chapter is she's tracing the development of human thought, action, and society to explain the kind of predicament that we are in today. And I know it's rather abstract. I know it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to you. But if you think hard on it, I think you will find some interesting ideas and wisdom within what Arendt has to say. And so to make this more concrete for you, to get you to better understand what she's saying and why, let's just look at the general themes of what she's trying to do in this book. Because I asked you just to read one chapter, and just reading that chapter alone is not going to be enough to give you a picture of the kind of analysis of contemporary society that she provides and the description of this messed up situation that we are in. pretend I didn't spell that wrong. To recapitulate, what she's trying to do, at least in the first part of this book, is analyze the nature and development of contemporary society. And she says that our contemporary society has confused those three activities that we engage in. In writing on Arendt's analysis, the author who wrote the introduction to this book, Margaret Canavan, says the following. Arendt's account of the human condition reminds us that human beings are creatures who act in the sense of starting things and setting off trains of events. This is something we go on doing whether we understand the implications of our actions or not, with the result that both the human world and the earth itself have been devastated by our self-inflicted catastrophes. Looking at what she calls the modern age, from the 17th to the early 20th century, she diagnoses a paradoxical situation in which radical economic processes were set off by human action, while those concerned increasingly thought of themselves as hopeless flotsam on the currents of socioeconomic forces. Both trends, she believed, were linked with a new focusing of public attention on economic activities that had traditionally been private matters for the household. Thus, what she's saying is we've kick-started economic processes that have a debilitating effect on our society and on us, and we feel hopeless and powerless to fix it. But we're not. Okay, that's going to be one of the key takeaways at the end here. In her prologue, however, she observes that this modern age of which she writes has itself now passed away. For the advent of nuclear technology has begun a new and yet unknown age in the long interaction between human beings and their natural habitat. If she were alive today, she might point to a novel variation on the familiar theme of power and helplessness, again connected with the emergence into the public realm of a natural function hitherto cloaked in privacy. On the one hand, the advent of genetic engineering, with its power to set off new processes that burst the bonds of nature, strikingly confirms human transcendence and what she called a rebellion against human existence itself as a given. On the other hand, our self-understanding as animals has deepened into unprecedented stress, not just on production, but on reproduction. Matters of sex, allowed only recently into the public arena, seem rapidly to be elbowing other topics out of public discourse, while neo-Darwinian scientists encourage us to believe that everything about us is determined by our genes. Since the gap between power and responsibility seems wider than ever, her reminder of the human capacity for action and her attempt to think what we are doing are timely. However, we need to listen carefully to what she is saying, for we can easily misunderstand her message as a call for humanity to rise from its torpor, take charge of events, and consciously make our own future. The problem with that quasi-Marxist scenario is that there is no humanity that could take responsibility in this way. Human beings are plural, different, unique, and mortal. And it is these features of the human condition that give politics both its miraculous openness and its desperate contingency. The most heartening message of the human condition is its reminder of human natality in the miracle of beginnings. In sharp contrast to Heidegger's stress on our mortality, Arendt argues that faith and hope in human affairs come from the fact that new people are continually coming into the world, each of them unique, each capable of new initiatives that may interrupt or divert the chain of events set in motion by previous actions. She speaks of action as the one miracle working factor in man, pointing out that in human affairs it is actually quite reasonable to expect the unexpected, and that new beginnings cannot be ruled out even when society seems locked in stagnation or set on an inexorable course. And so, what kind of contemporary society are we living in? Well, it is one which has confused these fundamentally distinct activities. It's one in which we've experienced the loss of an authentic concern for immortality, which I've been talking about this whole time. No longer do we care about working together and producing something stable and secure for ourselves and future generations. We're just becoming self-serving, right? Narcissistic, oriented either towards what is inside us or what is above us, not what is around us. That's one thing that we have suffered. Consequently, we've experienced the loss of building and maintaining what she calls a stable human artifice, or a happy, healthy, secure society. She says that due to a bunch of reasons, whereas in the ancient Greek world, there was a split between what she calls the private and public realms, the realm of the household, the realm of personal possessions, and the realm of the political and the communal. Nowadays, private affairs are public, public affairs are private. And one of the big parts of this book is she's saying this split that was in ancient societies, where these two realms did not mix, has basically blown up. It's been subsumed by a rising realm she calls the social realm. And you'll see evidence of this today, right? When people say things like, everything is political. Now, people will criticize you for the private thoughts and actions that you engage in at home in your political life. They politicize it. And Arendt doesn't think this is good. She thinks that we need some sort of private space and some sort of public space that are distinct. But in our present age, that barrier has dissolved. And now everything is both private and social and open. And it's this contradictory mess. And thus, consequently, one of the reasons why everything is crap today, and people care more about money than taking care of other people, why there's inequality and oppression and all of this garbage, is because we're doing politics differently. There's been a loss of meaningful politics, of people's hope in the future, and there's been a loss of opportunities for people to make history and do things that can be witnessed and that will allow them to be remembered. Consequently, there's been a loss of incentive to actually care about this stuff and make it better. She discusses economic modernization. What has this released on us? Mass production and consumption. And what has mass production and consumption done? Well, it's increased inequality. It's producing all of this shit that we do not need. Stuff is piling up in landfills. It's destroying the environment. Why? What good is this doing for us? Do you need every new fashion garment? Do you need every new piece of technology? Planned obsolescence is a thing. Now you do have to buy the latest technology because it's built to destroy itself after a certain amount of time. So mass production and consumption is driven by this stuff, and it's causing a whole bunch of problems. It's harming the environment, and it's harming us physically and psychologically. Think of all the poisonous foods now that people are eating that are being processed and mass-produced. And this mass production and consumption is driving stupid farming practices where we're depleting the soil of its nutrients. And our food is getting worse for us. But that's not the only thing that's wrong. We have this amazing thing called science, which we have used for awesome purposes throughout human history. Fundamentally changed human life. Running water and electricity is awesome. The telescope is awesome. All these medical cures and medical technologies are awesome. But what else has it produced? It's released upon the world power for the first time in history of us being able to completely destroy ourselves and the planet if we want to. That might be okay in a possible world where we had the knowledge and wisdom and good character to wield them, but do we? Do you trust those world leaders to handle their nukes appropriately? Do you trust our world leaders to handle the nukes appropriately? Fuck no, you don't. And so now we have to deal with these technologies that have the potential to destroy or completely transform human life in ways that we cannot imagine, like genetic engineering, the nuclear bomb, biowarfare, all this crap. And instead of thinking about and slowing down whether or not we should actually make these things, no, we just full steam ahead, right? Full steam ahead on AI research, producing bigger, better bombs, engaging in genetic engineering. Full steam ahead. And so we're living in what you might call an unprecedented time in human history. Our values and priorities have changed. We live in these large-scale societies where no one person can or should take responsibility for anything that's happening. We're destroying the world around us. We're threatening to continue to develop things that we don't have the wisdom or knowledge to control and use appropriately. We bicker. We're politically polarized. We're poisoning ourselves psychologically and physically, and you might say spiritually. We're in a real mess. But Arendt's message is not one fundamentally of pessimism. She has real hope and faith that we can work this out. But it would require us to actually look in the mirror, look at what we are doing and why, slowing down and thinking about this stuff. It would require us to actually take stock of what we are doing, honestly. What kind of society is desirable that we want to produce? And the tools that are going to be necessary to get there. Insofar as we live in a society that we contribute to creating, which then retroactively conditions us into thinking and behaving in some ways, we are heavily influenced by all of these forces and processes that are bigger than us, that we can't control. But we are not determined by them, Arendt says. Each of us has the capacity to start new things, to take a different action, to change things. We are not absolutely determined to destroy ourselves and others or make this planet uninhabitable. Ironically, then, you could say, even though the contemplative life has in some part led us into this mess, and people's values and priorities being directed towards that of which is not of this earth, ironically, it seems like philosophy is something we're going to have to engage in, at least in part, to get out of this mess. So it's going to require some contemplation. But if we think hard about what's going on, if we work on understanding our society, if we orient ourselves properly in the world, we can improve things. That is the message I want you to take away from this lecture. Yes, shit sucks, but we can improve things. Okay? And that's one of the reasons why I think philosophy is so valuable. Yes, there are some people who just spend their time thinking about dumb, useless things, these armchair philosophers, right, and just getting into arguments, people. But what philosophy can do for you is it can train you how to think better. It can train you to ask the pertinent questions so that we can all work together and get out of the mess that we have constructed for ourselves. So even though you don't think it's valuable, even though half of the students here are missing because they don't think they need to come here, they don't think that this is useful, I'm telling you that it is. If you actually spent time reflecting and engaging in critical thinking, asking questions and talking with others, you will be amazed at what you can accomplish. Okay. I'm done with my rambling now. So I guess I'll just end with maybe a little discussion. What kinds of thoughts and feelings are popping up for you as you're listening to this, as you were doing the reading? What are you thinking and feeling? Could be anything. Yeah.
Would she? So does she not support science?
Oh no, she thinks science can be great and wonderful, but basically her problem with it is we're doing a bunch of stuff without thinking about it. That's dumb. Why are we doing that? And look at what we've done. Now we have these amazing technologies that it doesn't seem like we're fit to wield yet. So no, she's not anti-science or anything. She's just like, we got to be careful, people. Like, yeah. So what do you think? I don't know.
I don't know. Like, I mean, with AI, there's definitely like a shit ton of risks and stuff. But I mean, the people working on those like softwares and technologies like that, they are trying to work towards like an active life, and maybe
Sure.
they are trying to become immortal through that, even though it has some like dire consequences and stuff.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why she's going to say we have this loss of an authentic concern for immortality actually has a lot to do with some of the things that a lot of people right now are researching and working on. If you're developing AI so that you can someday upload your consciousness into a computer and live forever, that is not an authentic concern for immortality. Because you're just caring about yourself, right? You're not trying to improve things and make society better for people. You're not interested in leaving behind a lasting legacy. You're just interested in preserving your life. So that's actually something that I wrote a lot on in my thesis, is how all these anti-aging and cryogenic stuff and AI stuff and orientations, you might say, towards the spiritual are for Arendt not what she considers an authentic concern for immortality.
I have like multiple feelings about it, because I feel like in some senses she's right. Like, we have become very self-centered now, but that's, I think, the condition of like people's lives, like Aristotle and the names that we all remember today, like, are just entirely different than our life, and like you can't really compare that like in any way, because we can't just hire slaves anymore
right.
and sit and contemplate human existence. Like, a lot of times, like you said in the beginning, like, we have to work, we have to make a living, we will be homeless or whatever. But like, I just feel like it's become way more difficult to like actually make a name or like leave a legacy than it was then, because also that was in a time where there wasn't a lot of thought going towards, you know, those big questions of life, where we're in a day of age where we have a lot of answers, or we have a lot of ideas to those questions now. We're thinking in an advanced way because we have to, because those basic questions have been contemplated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot more people now. Our knowledge has grown. Our situation has changed. And you're right, all of that makes it difficult for us to...
And I feel like there are people that are making a big impact. Like, I think that people who work towards, like, climate change, like, organizations, like, huge organizations that do try to reverse a lot of the damage that our society has done are very impactful. I think it's just, like, more difficult to have, like, a legacy per se, because there are so many people doing a lot of stuff to try to help. Like, I think there are a lot of selfish people, there are a lot of, unfortunately, people in power who don't have good motives, but I think there are a lot of regular people that just don't have the name, or like they don't have the ability to like grow a name, but they are doing a lot to change.
And that's great. Arendt would say that's awesome. She's not trying to say, like, look, in order to be a fulfilled person, you have to leave behind a legacy. What she's trying to make us aware of is, since that isn't a priority for us anymore, that is one of the big reasons why everything is so fucked up. Is because people don't care about making this stuff better. Like, if people cared more about that, a lot of things would be different, better. But
I
Yeah.
think the right people don't care. Like, I think a
Yeah.
lot of people do. I think the people who have the ability to make the biggest change don't care enough. Like,
Sure.
political power. Like,
And the people
how-
with money and
Exactly. Like, they don't care because it doesn't apply to them. Like, the people who do care to make a change are the ones suffering from the shit that they're not changing. So it's like kind of very difficult to, like, if you're not politically in power, really make a difference. Like, that's noticeable, I guess, because we just don't have that power anymore.
yeah. Yeah. And there are incentives for the people who do have the power and the money to, well, do other things because they're insulated, right, from the effects of a lot of these things. You know, who do you think is going to be the first person living on Mars? A rich guy, right? Who's going to leave here because he's like, oh, the Earth has gone to shit. Can't grow any food anymore. I'm out. Right? Yeah. So yeah, that's a big thing too. And fundamentally, I think she would say, yeah, the people who could make a difference don't care, and they need to change their priorities. Like, that's not good. That's bad. They're self-centered in some sense, narcissistic, right? Yeah. Okay, what are the rest of y'all thinking?
I liked what she said. I just think, like, I think it gets tied into, like, when we talked about, like, the first, like, kinds of life you can live, like, they're really in the consumption one because they don't have the perspective of, like, the other people.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we're painting with broad strokes here, right?
Yeah.
Like, there are certainly people who have power and money who do care and are trying to do things and who are making a difference. And not everybody is, as we'll see next week, a consumptive automaton with no thoughts, original thoughts and feelings. But that is kind of a trend of our present society, right? What do you spend the majority of your life doing? And you're probably not a bad person. Scrolling on your phone, watching YouTube, looking at Instagram and Twitter, watching Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and Discovery Plus, right? Isn't that how people live nowadays? Our free time is taken up by these activities of consumption. And Arendt would say that's bad. We need to change things if we want to live a more fulfilled life and if we're going to fix things. Because a lot of people are going to say, although that kind of life is addicting and it's hijacking your neural circuitry, deep down you know it's not fulfilling. You feel bored watching that stuff, but yet you go on doing it. And I would know, because that's how I live. Scrolling Reddit for 2 hours a day. Bored. Out of my mind. But yet, what do? I just go back to it. Yeah. Okay, anything else? Do you feel like you generally get what she's trying to say? I know she uses a lot of complex words and ideas to make it. She's a very deep thinker, but hopefully this has given you a better sense of what the hell she was trying to get at in this chapter. Shall we leave it there? Okay, we'll end a few minutes early here. Thank you for coming and listening. Please talk about this stuff with your friends and family members and think about it. I will see you next week. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to email me, okay? All right.